All right, today I want to talk about how to add a login screen to your project so we can keep users who are not supposed to be in our project out. Don't recommend doing this right away. I know that Patrick, you're working on login, right, for Lions?
Yep.
That Patrick's working on it, but that's one of the last things I would integrate into the system. You'll see hopefully today that it's not hard to integrate. It's not all over the place. It's kind of its own little isolated piece. And once we're ready and you all have done your development, we can integrate it and test it and make sure we can't float around in there. But it should be pretty straightforward to integrate. The file I'm going to be using today is on OneDrive and Web Data Management Unit 7. The async dupe check is what we wrote last time. I finally got that to work. All right, the asynchronous duplicate check, and I've now added the word login to it because it'll be a login screen as well, so you want to download that. You'll also need a table with users in it. This creates that table. I've already downloaded them, so now I'm going to go and bring them in. And all this does is creates a user table with 2 passwords in it. I'll explain why when we dig in it. But password is the one I don't use anymore. The password hash is the one we're going to use in this example. But the reason they're still both there, and I decided not to take them out to be safe, the reason they're both there is because the servers don't always have the updated most current version of PHP installed. And the hashing technique that I'm going to show you for creating passwords requires a fairly recent version of PHP. So what happened last year in the project is we built it around this new PHP thing and then we tried to put it on the server and what, never heard of it. I'd never heard of the function, so we had to backtrack. So what I've done here instead, and you wouldn't normally do this, is included both passwords so that if we get stuck, and we shouldn't, if we get stuck, we can revert back to the old password. But we shouldn't have that problem. And so here are the passwords that were generated, and I'll show you some code that generates them in case you need to. But I have 2 users, one called sample, one called student, and their passwords are exactly the same. So this is what the 40-character hash the old way would generate. And here's the new one. It uses a 60-character hash, generates a more complicated, harder to crack version. So I'm going to add that table to my employees database real quick. And that seems to have worked, so we're done. We've already talked about session variables. So I'm not going to talk about them too much because many of you have been using them already. Remember, the session variables use cookies and some files on the server and an array called the $session array, which is an extra super duper global variable because it actually retains its values, or seems to retain its values, between executions of this program. So you can actually leave the website, go somewhere else, come back 3 months later, and if your session variables are alive that long, the program will remember who you were, that you logged in, and so on. Justin?
Um, Talking about the whole using to store an object into the session variable, or actually start like using PHP to get any query out of the database and kind of storing it as an object with
Yep.
JSON. It will only return the first record and make that an object. So I was having troubles with registration because I wanted multiple fields
Yeah.
for like available camps.
You can't create an array of objects? Not
I
yet.
was trying. I will.
Okay. All right. So
Very
he's
difficult.
got me a little sidetracked, but one of the things that Justin talked about earlier was creating a record of camper information, for instance,
And camper information is fine because you only need one.
because you only need one, so that you don't in your session variable store a whole bunch of variables. You actually store an object, and inside the object you can dot notation to get to dot first name, dot last name, dot whatever you want about that camper. But he's having trouble because it didn't make the recording. I'm repeating all this. He's having trouble creating an array of those objects so that if you wanted to return and store inside your session variables larger amounts of data, you could. Now, we were a little concerned about that because of the amount of space that might take up, but Justin said, man, where he works, big old huge monster structures of these things, and they're not terribly worried about it. All that data needs to be transferred anyways. At some point, it needs to be generated on the server. It's already generated. All we're really doing is transferring 3, 4, 5, 10K of data. That's a lot of data. 10,000 characters of data is a lot of data. That's no size problem at all. So that's something else to look into. It's not anything I talk about here. So back to the session variables. The session variables store values in a cookie until the program times out. If the user has the cookies turned off, we have a problem. These 3 lines of code I need to bring in. That's the one thing I forgot to do, was bring in our project. Here's the async dupe login. I'm going to bring that in. Okay, what we already did in the connection model, here's my PHP file for connections. We already created a session that currently lasts 60 seconds. So that's not very long. So what I'm going to do just to make this last a little longer is go times 60. So now it lasts an hour. Right? But I'm going to provide the user an opportunity to log out. And when they log out, we destroy their session variables. If you set it at 60, I think a couple of you have already discovered that the program forgets your session variable data pretty quickly, like after a minute. And you go back and all of a sudden you're looking at the search page and it's forgot whatever search page you had or whatever search options you had. How long you make this is up to you. Most of the information is secure. Most of the detailed information is stored on the server anyways. And so security is not a big issue. So I'm going to set this to 60 by 60. I believe that's an hour. Yeah, so this will last about an hour. And I'll also show you, if you need to for testing purposes, how to go find that cookie. And I haven't looked in Chrome, but I think I can find it. I know I found it yesterday when I was playing around with this in Firefox without too much trouble. So we've already embedded this. In my notes, it suggests that maybe you should embed it in the controller, the index file, but I think it works really nice in the connection string. We have to connect all the time. For every one of our actions does a connection. Why not just embed this inside the connection and then we don't have to worry about it? So we've done that already. Many of you have already used a session variable for a search string. I think we did it in the last example. Does our search use a session variable? Easiest way to find out is to look at the form for searching. So in my view for the employee list, that's where the search variable is. Here's my search box, and yes, it uses a session variable. So I'm not going to cover that again because we already did it. So we slide down here and past all this stuff that we did. Let's see if we can find the cookie. I'm going to launch this because I do have, I haven't put this in the right place yet. Oh, pause. Remind me to turn that back on again. Okay, so what Justin was talking about while the recording was off briefly is that session array, the $session variable array, is stored on the server. That's right. So you can't see what's inside it, but there has to be a way to link this computer, this browser, with its cookies, with that data. And so there's some connection in between there. And the connection that and this timing that we put in here is actually done for both the cookie and for the session variables on the server. They're not retained except for about an hour, and then both of them disappear. Unless we log out and log back in again. Unless we log out, at that point, both of the session variables and the cookies are cleared right away. So where do we find these? I haven't looked in Chrome. That's the one thing, so I'm kind of risking myself here, but I'm going to settings, and let's see, sign in. I need a cookies thing here someplace.
Close that, go back to your menu.
Go back to the menu here.
No, in Chrome, more tools.
More tools.
Developer tools.
Developer tools.
And
now we're here.
Go to resources.
Resources.
Up top.
Resources. Cookies. Okay, now we don't see any here yet because these are Chrome cookies maybe? Let's see what happens when we do more. So first thing I need to do is close this and come in here and actually go to the local host and launch that beast. Okay, so here's the login screen. Most of the login, this is obviously something you're going to tweak, but the login screen, mine has a username and a password, a login button, and a message. The message basically says to start off with, you have to log in, but if you get the wrong password, then it says that's not a good password. And if it's the right password, it doesn't say anything because you're gone. You're moved on to the next phase. I'm going to show you how all that ties together. What this feature, what this version of the page doesn't include is an opportunity to say reset my password or change my password. Though here I wouldn't put the change password in here because I want the user to log in before they change their password. If they've forgotten their password and they need to reset, then we need some kind of a link here that basically sends an email to the administrator saying my password's all messed up, please reset it for me. Or a page pops up that says, please call 715 Lions Camp to change your password.
Or you do what I've seen a lot of things is that we'll email you the link to reset your password.
But if you don't know your password, you can't reset it because my reset password page requires that you log in first. Otherwise, anybody could click on that, change it to whatever they want.
It emails you
It emails you a key.
the link or a key to reset it.
Yeah.
But it goes to your email so that it knows it went to the right person.
Okay.
So for the wrong person to do it, they have to steal your email first too.
Okay. So that's an option. That's good. So it's an email. We've reset your password to this.
That allows it to work without the
email.
interaction of a person.
There's still a problem of sending an email though. How do you send? That's a real challenge. It's from a web-based program where you can't guarantee that the user has Outlook or mail configured on their computer. And I think we solved that last semester. So if you decide there's an email link in it, we created a fake Gmail account for Lions Camp just to send them email from the program. So if that's something you're looking at doing, we can talk about that. So here's what it looks like. Why did I come here? Because now we should be able to go back to more tools and developer tools and resources, cookies, and see a new cookie. There's my local host cookie. And that's very similar to what it looks like in Firefox. In Firefox, I think I still have Firefox installed here. Really? I uninstalled it. Oh, there it is. And I'm not sure my notes are 100% current on this, on where to look for this stuff. In Firefox, you go to the menu, go to Preferences, you go to Privacy, I believe it is, and here you can change individual cookies. You come in here, there's tons and tons of cookies, at least in my Firefox here. You can do a search. I do a search for local. It finds the same local host cookie. And then you can remove just that one cookie so that you can continue to test your program. What's easier is to install a logout link someplace on your page. If you're testing, put a logout on your page and that'll wipe out the cookie as well. But if you need to get to it, here it is in Firefox. I have not looked where it's hiding in Explorer in a long time. I'm sure you can find it if you need to. But here's where you can find it. I haven't run it in Firefox, so I'd have to go to localhost and run it. I think I can do that. Oops. And at this point, I already have a cookie because we did the cookie building in the connection string, and I must have a connection string, otherwise this would never know that I'm not on the database. So now I can go back in here just to show it to you, remove individual cookies, you do a search for local. There it is, and notice it says it's a PHP session ID. This is what's stored locally. It's this big ugly ID number that is then communicated to the server.
If you click on localhost there, so you select it.
Yep.
They have when it expires.
Yep. Which is today, about an hour from now. Okay, so you can see when it expires in case you want to make sure your math is right. Okay, but what I'm more likely to want to do is remove the cookie. Now, this employees one should be working, so let me show you what happens if I remove that cookie a little later. I think I can come back here, yep. And I'm going to log in with the words student and student. And I'm in. And we saw before when I put in garbage, it said, no, you're not in. But now I'm in. What happens if I go in and I change that or delete the cookie?
Which is the same as if it expired.
Same as it expires. I leave this for an hour, and then I say, okay, I want to see Tammy's information. It goes, you're not logged in anymore. So that's my way of testing. If the user comes up here and says localhost async do check login action equals, and notice the action is correct. It's even got an employee ID number on there. Still won't let me log in. So if they try to bypass our navigation system by putting in their own action and jumping into the middle of our site, the way I have this coded, it senses that there's no session variable. It says, you're not going there. You got to log in first. And then when you log in, it takes you to the default location. It still won't let you jump in, but you've got to be logged in to jump around inside the site in case some hacker's trying to hack our action variables up here. Go ahead.
Can you somehow store that location so that when they do log in, they go there?
Probably, but why? Why do I don't want somebody typing in their own actions to bypass this. Probably one of you doing it.
Not an action, but thinking someone has a page bookmarked as. So say they always just want to go to the camps.
Once they log in, they can click their bookmark again. They're there.
Right.
So no. Can you? Yes, if you want to, go for it. But I would say if they're bookmarking the page, but they haven't logged in, they log in first and hit the bookmark again. But there might be a way to capture what they sent and use it again. Okay, so that's how the system works. I know what I haven't done in Chrome, so let's do a quick look in Chrome here. This is Chrome. Okay, here's my local host cookie, and again, I've got some value. It expires today at about 8 o'clock. It's Chrome being Greenwich Mean Time. 35 some odd characters for whatever that is, and here's the PHP session. So it's very much the same thing. I can click on it, and there's probably a trash it button here someplace. Maybe just hit delete, and it's gone. Okay. That's for your testing purposes, in case you put an hour cookie in there. And then you find out that your program's not working. It's letting you log. That's what happened to me yesterday. It was letting me log in even though I put in a bad password. Left out a $sign someplace. But in order for me to test it, I needed to wipe those cookies out. So back to the notes now. That's how you wipe out the cookies if you need to. Back to the notes. We want to talk a little bit before we talk about, and here's where the cookie stuff is. Again, I can't verify, but it should be close. And I don't have anything here for Chrome. First thing I'm going to talk about is password encryption. If we're going to allow the user to log in, we want to store their passwords. However, if we store the passwords in a database, it's conceivable for a bad database administrator or somebody who has the database password to go into the users table and see the passwords if you store them as pure natural text. And that's probably not a good idea. Definitely not a good idea. So what we are going to do is hash our passwords. What the password hash function, and this is built into the, I don't know if it mentions here which one. One of the more recent ones, to the point where it wasn't available to us last year. More recent versions of PHP. Password hash, that function was created. You send it the natural text password. It uses some kind of a key. This is built in. That's just a constant that we use. And it changes this password into a 60-character string, regardless of how long it is. It's always, the hash is always 60 characters long, so you can't look at the hashed password and see how long it is and then guess. So this is the new version. The older version used to use a SHA-1 function. That's still built in, it's still there. But now, according to this site, if you want to go read about it, you can. We have computers that are so dang fast that we can hit that site over and over and over again and crack hash or crack those passwords just by brute force. And there are nice people out there who create hashing tables. Millions upon millions of records where you do a search for what you found in the database, and it says, here's what that translates to. How nice is that? Thank you so much. Well, and that doesn't solve all of them, but it's not recommended anymore, particularly for stuff like passwords and credit card numbers and social security numbers and et cetera. None of those should be stored in the database in a raw format. It should all be hashed. But because of the vulnerability of SHA-1, there is now a password hash. Remember, in the database, I had two passwords. One is created using SHA-1 and the other one 40 characters. And the new one is 60 characters. Still supposed to be relatively secure with 60 characters. The list of tables, even 40 characters, you'd think that the table would be huge, and it is, but they're all over the web. 60 characters, it just makes it, should hold us for a few years before somebody comes up with a lot of hash tables for that. So it's just a function. You send it your normal text and a key, and everybody uses the same key, doesn't really matter, it's a constant. It might control what kind of hashes I don't mess with it. And in this case, I have it in my binding statement that says, take the password that the user gave you, hash it, and stick that into the parameters so that when I add it to the database, it adds it. So this is the code that I use to actually generate those two passwords that I have for sample and student. Very similar to that. I think I have it hiding here in my users function, so you can look at it if you want to create some sample passwords. This just gets me all the usernames. And for every one of the usernames, for each one of the usernames, updates the database setting the password to the SHA version and the hashed version. This one just does SHA, but you could use the same technique for hash. So that's how I made these sample ones, so that I knew what was in there. This is not something I normally use. It's only used to create sample data. Might be just as easy if you wanted to test Lions Camp to use my student and sample those two users, except those aren't very good camper names. But they could be usernames. And go from there. Or if Patrick wanted to, he could create a couple of users with the appropriate usernames with an email address, but set their password to sample for everybody, stealing the one that I have. So nothing too magical there, just updated the database by sending it hashed passwords. Pretty sure that SHA stands for secure hash, just short. So this is a better technique. And I don't have anything built into the sample, so you're going to have to do a little bit of analysis here. I don't have anything into the sample that allows you to create users and their appropriate passwords. I don't have anything in my sample that shows you how to change the passwords that's in there. But once you've collected the password from the user, you simply run it through this function, and it creates this big, ugly 60-character string. So what's more important for us is to reverse the process, and this kind of threw me for a loop. How do we know if what the user types in for a password is the same as the one that's in the database? Well, you just hash it again, right? No. Every time you hash the word sample, you get a different hash. It must be using the clock, Greenwich Mean Time, I don't know, but what I discovered last night is when I said password hash sample, I got this nice string. And then 30 seconds later, I did it again, and I get a different 60-character string. And so you can't compare today's hash with yesterday's hash because they don't match. And I couldn't figure out why it wasn't letting me in until I looked at the two passwords and they were different. So what you have to do to figure out, does this password, that's natural text again, Does this password match what's in the database? Is to use the password verify function that's again built into PHP. Password verify is a Boolean function. It either says yes, they match, or no, they don't. So I'll show you the code that I came up with there. This variable is extracted out of the database. So in the database, there's this big, ugly 60-character thing. What this function somehow magically does is say, okay, if I give you this text, would it hash to this somehow? It's magic. I don't know how it does it because the hash changes every day. So how could I don't know. I'm guessing there's something embedded inside this hash that says I was created on such and such a date, such and such a time. So use that, translate it. Now here's some other characters, and that's my guess. I have no idea. You and I really don't care. This is the most secure password generation system for PHP right now. And so the process is hash your passwords using this, and then check them by comparing natural text to the text from the database, running them both through this function to figure out whether, yes, that makes sense, they match. Seems to, well, obviously it works, you saw it. It let me in when it was supposed to, and it kept me out when it wasn't supposed to let me in. So that's the process. All right, so what do? PHP does have a standard login dialog box. Your Murak book, that I'm sure some of you haven't even cracked yet, but your Murak book does demonstrate that on those pages. It's actually built in. And you ask for this built-in login screen and you get a password, username, but you got no flexibility. You can't customize it for lines. You can't add the reset my password link, etc. So it's there, but I don't use it very much. Instead, we just use a regular form. That's what you saw in mine. The basic PHP says take that raw username. Some people actually combine to make things even more complex. Take the username and the password, concatenate them together, then hash it. It's an option. But with the security we now have with that password hash, we should be able to just hash the password. If the usernames are for some reason secure, and in our case they're not, right? At Lions, username is not secure, it's your email. You could blend them together. We already talked about some other things. There is no way to reverse engineer a hash. So if I want, there's some websites that somehow magically send you your password via email. Well, that means they're not quite as secure, because if they can decrypt it, then so can somebody else. These are not decryptable. You cannot work in reverse order and say, here's my hash, tell me what that means. If there's a function that does that in PHP, I haven't found it. So how do we build this thing? First things first, we need some cases. All right, so I've created some user cases. Nothing fancy here. There's a login case and a logout case in my index file. I have added a case for anything that starts with log. That could start with user. In this case, I just have my actions called login and logout. But my database or my data table that keeps track of this is users, so I have a little disconnect there between my table name and my action names, but I think it's pretty straightforward. So if the user says this, then we go. Now before I leave, let me show you this one. This is what prevents users from backdooring our system. The first thing we do is say, what action did you request? If there isn't one, give me the employee list. And then the next thing we do is check the session variable. There is an element in the session array, I call it a session variable called Authorized User. It's just a name, we can call it whatever we want. If that session variable is not set, if it's set, we're good. I don't set it to false if they log in wrong. I just don't even set it. So if it's not set, then change the action to login. So no matter what happens up here, the action gets changed into the login screen. One simple command. because our session variables are embedded in here, we don't need to do much. So when we decide to bring in the user table and login screens, we add this statement, tweaking the variable name, maybe tweaking the action, and we add the cases to the index file. And we're done. All the rest of your forms are unaffected by this unless, well, maybe the menu might have a logout option on it now. That's the menu. Your forms are unaffected by this.
Except for the forms that show different things depending on who's logged in.
True. But that would be something that when we figure out it's an authorized user, we set other session variables to say it's an authorized user at level whatever. Okay. It still doesn't change the index file. Your index file is a little bigger than this because you have more cases, but we add one more case, we add one more command right before the switch statement, and we're done. So it's not hard to integrate this system into it. We still need a view. It's the login view down here someplace. There it is. There's the login view. If you have a password change screen, we'll need a view for that. I don't have one embedded here, but that's just 3 fields, right? What's your password? What's your new password? What's your new password? Validation to make sure this one's correct. And validation to make sure the new one meets our requirements, whatever they are, and they're the same. So not too hard there. The cases themselves, let's take a look at the cases now. Here's the user cases. On login, we find out if there is a username. I could modify this. This is old school because now we have the, what's the name of that function? Field value function. Field value from request of username. If it exists, give it to me. Otherwise, give me a space. Same thing with the password. The login screen expects a variable name called username and password to be sent to it. What this allows you to do, and when we look at the login screen, you'll see this, but basically, if I get it wrong, some sites you come back to log in and the boxes are empty and you start over again. What this allows us to do is pass the old log username and the old password back, even though you can't see the password. Pass them back in so the boxes are there and you can go, oops, that's one short. I must have missed a W or something, and try that. We can do any combination if you want. You can leave the username alone and wipe out the password. What these 2 variables allow me to do is send them back again so the user doesn't have to start over again. Then I have a function that's built into my user's model that checks to see if this is an authorized user. The authorized user is yes or no. If it is an authorized user, then set the session variable. This is the same session variable I had in my index file. Right? The index file said, is this session variable set? I just simply set it to true. What you might do is set that session variable to something other than true, make it a level. Instead of an authorized user, we'd have the user level. If the user level is not set, they haven't logged in. If the user level is set, then go drag it around all over the place as a session variable. Different way of handling that. That's what I would recommend. Go ahead.
So this is, you already have a table with everybody's password.
Yes.
So
Otherwise, how do you log in?
Because in some websites you sign up first and you
Right.
provide the server with.
That's another
password.
form that basically lets you provide that information. Where's your password come from?
Right.
You create one.
Okay. So this is already.
This is already there, and part of what we have to figure out in Lions is where did that password come from? So yes, we assume the data is already there. To add a new user, you'd need a new user add form, and maybe you set the password to the same thing as their user ID to start with, kind of like Midstate does, or some combination thereof. And then you have to make them change it. How do you do that? Well, if the current password hash matches our default password, then you make them change it. When they log in, yes, you successfully logged in. However, you got a stupid password because it's our default one. You must change it. We can ask those questions. And actually, we don't even have to hash it because we can check to see what the user typed, see if it's equal to the default in raw text. If it's the default, cool, you're in, but first place I'm taking you, default action is password update. Now, they might be able to bypass the system at that point, but most users say I have no clue how to change the action now that they're logged in. They're logged in. Okay, if they are authorized, then we take them to whatever our default action is. Notice my default action is now controlled by my login screen. Which is interesting, just occurred to me. Do I really need this? Why would, if the action is not set, what does that mean? You haven't logged in. That might be an easier way to do this. This might be able to go away. Let's think about that. That might be able to go away. Is there any way that I would get down here if the session variable is set without having been on another page? There has to be an action. It has to be set. The default is now, I think we could get rid of that code. Guess there's a good way to check. Let's get rid of it. Save. See if this works. I don't think we need that. We can just check the session variable, because if there is no session variable, then make them log in. If there is a session variable, oh, wait a minute. No. If they come back after a half an hour, we want to remember that they're already logged in and give them the default action, takes them right to the list.
And if you ever set it to nothing,
Set what to nothing?
the action variable.
Do we have action variables that are set to nothing?
No, because then it gives you an error message.
They don't match any of our actions, do they?
Didn't, maybe that was in a different one. We used a period or something like action equals.
No.
No, we use a dot with no action, but that's pretty rare.
Okay.
Well, I guess that's true. Some of the actions we said go back to whatever the default is by just the action is a dot. There is no action. It's not action dot. The link is simply a dot. Go back and do whatever the default is. So now I've got this employee list in two different places. You could create a constant of some kind and plug that in, and you all have constant
Or the
files.
login could just say use the default action.
But what if it's a constant? This would have to be stored in a constant because it's also inside of the user cases here. I want that to be the same action. Okay, so I have to be careful. Either put this into a constant and plug it in here, or just make sure the two are in sync. It's just two. It's not so bad.
Wouldn't you always want to have that in your whatever the home, not the home page, but your first PHP file?
My controller?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's in there.
No, not this page. You were just on.
The index page, right?
Wouldn't you, on the index page, wouldn't you want to have the login first?
Log in first?
Yeah.
No, because then it checks the request array. And if the user bypassed it, there will be a value in the request array, and this would change the action again back to employee list. So what he's suggesting is I move this up, right? Do that first. But if there is a request array because the user bypassed my system, this is true. This is set, and so we use their action, and that action overwrites this action. I don't want it to.
So
this never goes anywhere. This just sets a variable to action, but never does anything with it. Before I do anything with it, I change it to login.
oh, because you're checking the session.
Right, session versus request array. They're two different arrays we're looking at. Good question. All right, back to the user cases. If they are not an authorized user, then I pick a couple of messages. This login message is used by my login screen. So that variable needs to be set. And if they leave the username blank, tell them they have to log in. if it's a bad password. If the username's not blank, then it's probably a bad password or a bad username. I tell them that. You can get as elaborate here as you want. Unknown user. Invalid password for this user. Come on, dummy, give it to me. Whatever you want to do. And your JavaScript, and maybe this is a lost the term. An asynchronous command. Where I never leave the login screen. You can't get out of the login screen. This bounces back and forth between. Could be asynchronous because it's a quick query. Yeah, and that query could do all the hashing and etc. Unhashing can do all that. So this could be asynchronous if that's what you want to, if that's why you wanted to do it. This technique does not do that. This technique simply brings you back around and says, that's not right, try again. And this username password then gets sent back to the form, so it's still on the form. And it takes you back to that page again. So we haven't hit it in the notes yet, but here's the logout command. Clear the session array. Define it as an empty array. Destroy the session variable. Here's the message, you've been logged out. Username, I had to add these. They were causing me errors because they were undefined when I went in there. So the username and password are wiped out, and then I go back to the login page again. Okay, so there's most of the logic. The only logic, you see how this tying together here. Index comes here. This figures out whether you're legal or not and logs you out if appropriate. The only function we really need to take a look at in the user's cases is the authorized user function. And this has been modified. That's why you see some commands lined out here, because here's the hash and stuff. I tried some stuff. This does not work. I can't hash today's password with yesterday's password. They will not match. So I had to modify my logic a little bit. First of all, I said this used to be a select count. How many users do we have with this username password combination? But I can't do that anymore. So now what I'm doing instead is extracting from the table the data for this user. I expect there to be one record, right? So I fetch it. First of all, was there one? If the row count is 0, then they're not authorized, and we return, this function is a Boolean function, returns true or false. They're either authorized or they're not. We basically return false. The reason I didn't put my return statement up here is I need to close. And I can't close until after that command has been issued. So I didn't put the return statement right inside there. I created a temporary variable and set it to false. Otherwise, if there is a row, good, we got a row, that means the user exists, then grab that row and get me the password out of it. And my field name is pw password hash instead of just password. Could be just password. Get me that data, compare it to this using the verify. That's either a true or false. Close the cursor, get out. So this is my first thought last night after Easter eggs and Easter dinner, kind of full, testing this to make sure it works. Got a better solution, glad to hear it. Justin?
Just for strictly error message,
Oh, go ahead.
would you, instead of passing back a Boolean, pass back an object with a Boolean and a message?
Could, to tell it which one's wrong?
Right, to say we can't find a user with this username, or
Sure.
username and email don't match.
Right, because if we hit this statement, we could say isAuth equals code 0 or whatever, 1, 0. And if it's bad password, then we'd have to put some kind of a code in here saying it's 1, otherwise it's code 2 and it's good, or whatever you want to do, sure. You could send back some information from this, let this method be smart enough to say, here's what's wrong. It's one of 3 things. Actually, just, yeah, one of 3 things. Either you're good, bad username, or bad password. And it can pass that information back, but it wouldn't be a Boolean function. It'd have to send some secret signal back, and that's fine. Could. I don't know that I'd create an object for one variable, maybe an enumeration or something, but enumeration just assigns a text value to a number. The numbers aren't, there's only 3 numbers. It wouldn't be so bad. Zeros, everything's cool. One's one error, two's a different error. Can deal with it. So this is the tricky part, if you will. Get me everything we know about this user. Did we get a user? Yes. Then does the password unmatch or verify against this password? This is the one in the database. This is the 60-character hashed password that's stored in my database. Compare that to the one the user just sent me. Do they verify? If that's true, then everything's cool, you move on. If it's false, this returns false, and the controller page basically says, nope, you're not in, back to the login page. That's how they tie together. Not too hard, plenty of flexibility. This is the basics. I'm guessing that if you needed to have a password change form, you know how to create it. It's just a 3-element form, not any big deal. What else is in my notes? This is all pretty much the same stuff. Those are the cases. Oh, logout, I need to show you that. I did show you that. So, Murex examples, he's a little behind. I don't know if he's got an updated version of the book. And we're not even using 4.3 anymore. I think we're on 5.3. I think we're on 5.4 with some extra numbers after it. So PHP is another one of those programs that's constantly updating. And please remember that this password hash that we're talking about is in one of the newer editions. So if it doesn't work when you post it on your server, all of a sudden you can't log in. You have to switch back to SHA-1.
Most servers pretty good.
Pardon me?
Are most servers pretty good?
Yeah, they're not. Last year we got caught, but most servers are pretty good. I mean, we were on the cutting edge of password hash. I didn't even know about it. One of the students said, showed me that link and said, it's bad, don't use it. Servers weren't up to speed then. Now they should be fairly up to speed. I think I can go to FatCow and see if it tells me what version it's on. First of all, what version are we using? Can I tell from here which PHP I'm using? I don't think so. What? No.
Oh, you're looking at MySQL there.
No, this is Apache. MySQL Workbench wouldn't tell me which PHP I'm using because it doesn't care. I would have to open the PHP admin somewhere and dig it out. Where did I see that the other day? Oh, that text that I have you delete that shows up in htdocs. Remember when you first built this, there was some junk in htdocs that tells you which version of PHP you're using. It's probably in the config file someplace.
If you update XAMPP, does it update the PHP too?
Yes, if you don't, that's the key. If you don't update XAMPP, then it doesn't update PHP.
In your like on your index page, you can do an echo PHP info in a PHP tag. Or maybe not on your echo or index page, but somewhere.
I'll do it in login. What is it? PHP
PHP info
underscore info or one word?
One word. Friends. Close friends. Close the tag.
That's it? Okay.
According to this.
That's a lot of info.
5.63, right in the top.
Okay, 5.6.3. Okay. So that's the current version. So now my question is, what's FatCow using?
your note say that 583 was the?
No, it was 538. Is what the book was written on.
Oh,
You can,
I forget how this tells me which version I'm using.
you throw that PHP echo command up on the website.
Put it where? Oh, I'd have to put the whole thing posted on my website. I haven't done that yet. I thought it told me off on the side here someplace. Server information. Let's see what you can tell me. PHP 5.3. Ooh. So to answer your question, I don't know about all the other ones, but mine might still not work there. And they have not, at least according to this, they've not updated their PHP to 5.4.
is that what we're using?
This is where we thought about putting lions until, but so you might not be able to use that, and I'd have to dig up my old notes that I'm sure I can find someplace on how to do SHA. But SHA is pretty simple. In the SHA version of this, if you're checking to see if the user is valid, you just get a count of all the users with this SHA password, because SHA will give you the same encrypted value every single time. So when you send it sample, it gives you this 40-character string. 2 weeks from now, you send it sample, it gives you the exact same 40-character string. That's how they can make tables and say, hey, here's what sample turns into. Okay. So it's actually simpler. You do a count of username, passwords. How many do you have that match? Downside of that is you don't know what's wrong. You just say there isn't a match for username, passwords. You could still use this technique and simply say, does the password match? So with 5.3 on Fat Cow, that's a bit of an issue. I have to send him an email. So you plan on updating anytime soon? All right, so let's run it one more time. Actually, I can take that command back out again. That was the login view. And where I chose to put my logout is out here just as an example. It's out of the way, but I can see it. It's just on my main page. It's just a little div that floats to the right. And when I click on it, it logs me out and takes me back to that page and tells me I've been logged out. And if I then go check the cookie, it should be gone.
It makes it so complicated on a Mac.
No, it's still there. Actually, it's still there because it's a new cookie. Because as soon as I logged out and then came back around, it's now created a brand new cookie. But I'm not signed in anymore. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been on that page. Yeah, they make it a little more complicated. Okay, so let's log in one more time. Okay, and then I go, you know what, I'm not terribly interested in this anymore. Let's go to Boker's website. That's much cooler. Read that stuff. And go to Blackboard. And then go, oh, wait, I forgot something. No login. Because the cookie remembers. If you don't like that, then whenever, I don't know how do you know that the user's left your site?
Well, the expiration time is controlled by when you leave the browser. Oh, it's when you leave the browser, I think.
The last time you load the page. If you walk away from this for a minute and click on something, you got to log back in again. Okay. If you do stuff, then you're all right. So I don't think this is so bad because it's on one computer. An hour is maybe that too much. If you walk away after 5 minutes, maybe that's what you want to do. 5 times 60. After 5 minutes, you walk away, then we make you log back in again. Okay. And if they don't like it, that's an easy fix, right? And just go into that command and change it to 10, change it to 15. Again, at Lions Camp, somebody walking up to a computer that isn't theirs and sitting down so that they can hack into the system? Not likely. I'm not terribly worried about it.
Keep it 24 hours.
You can make it 24 hours.
So that's what we do.
Yeah.
Ours is 24.
Because they're not worried about somebody sitting down at your workstation.
No, on our consumer website.
Yep. But if somebody walks into a Guardian's site and the Guardian's left them logged in, that doesn't bother us either, right? Oh, well, you shouldn't have walked away because now somebody's gone in there and say you take 60 more drugs than
No,
you
you
did.
forgot to log out.
Well, that's the other side. You forgot to log out. So how do you make it 24 hours? You take our 60 by 60 and multiply by 24 because that's 1 hour. So that's the background. Just one more real quick. There is a login view. And nothing real tricky here except it does bring in the old username and the old password. In the index file, not much going on. We added one command here that says no going in the back door. That prevents you from trying to get into the system without logging in. And it also times you out. Added a cases or a cases file for the logs and log or user cases. User cases, you can almost copy those word for word if you wish. What do we do when they want to log in and they're authorized or they're not? What do we want to do when they're logged out? And then the last thing we looked at was the authorized user method that generates that information. Now, the problem I have here is competency. One of you, I think Harold said he was going to help him. One of you is going to be doing login screens. The rest of you need to prove it to me. So what I'm going to do in the next couple of minutes here is I'm going to put an app out there called Red Cross that doesn't have a login screen attached to it, and your job is to attach a login screen to it. Don't go crazy, redo the Red Cross thing because it's probably written in an older style of mine with different variables. Some of the functions may be missing. Just add the login screen. If you can find all the pieces, parts that need to be plugged in, I'll be happy. So there is an assignment in web data management for everybody except Patrick and Harold. Did you say you were going to help him with the login? Yeah.
I'm helping Patrick too.
No,
I'll
you're-
probably still.
Yeah, so is Brittany. Yeah.
I'll still do it anyway.
But it's not a bad idea, as Harold just said, to do it anyways. It's not terribly hard. You can steal a lot of this code, and you just got to figure out where to put it and where all the pieces, parts, the recording should help you.
Due by end of semester?